Welcome to CIS 4600 Service Learning with Randall Nail. In the following 12 modules, I'll be introducing Bootstrap, which is a framework for building the user interfaces for web applications that's based on HTML5. This is the first session, which is more of an introduction. The other 11 will go into various details. So by way of introduction, modern web applications need to be able to work on all sorts of devices, PCs, tablets, phones, and more. HTML5, which is the modern specification for building HTML web applications, is a combination of, it's actually a combination of multiple things. It's HTML, the latest version of that, cascading style sheets, as well as JavaScript. And these three things together provide the underlying capabilities to create web user interfaces that can really run on just about any kind of browser device or that sort of thing. However, doing all of that with raw HTML5 can be, one, quite overwhelming. If you've ever looked at the spec for HTML5, it's massive. And coding all of the user interface features, including the ability for those features to adapt to different sizes and types of devices, is many hours, days, weeks, and on large projects, months of work. And so Bootstrap was developed by Twitter back in 2011, and it provides a framework around HTML5 for user interface development. And what it does is it simplifies all of the capabilities of HTML5 into ready-to-use classes and scripts. You don't have to go build your own classes, for example, a small device or a medium-sized device or a large device. You don't have to create your own JavaScript that if a user turns their phone from portrait mode to landscape mode, automatically adjusts the web application on the fly. Those pre-made and ready-to-use classes and scripts are all there in Bootstrap for use. The other thing about Bootstrap is it's malleable, meaning that you can actually, if you don't like the way something works, the source code's there and you can go change it. And so what this does as well is it allows building of templates and starter kits by developers for other developers. And the last thing that's really cool about it is it's open source and readily available for use without purchasing any kind of licensing. You can just start using it. So the overall goal of this course is to provide an introduction to developing device-friendly web user interfaces using the Bootstrap framework. So the rest of the lessons will do that. So here's a list of the sessions. So one is this session. It's kind of an overview. Two will go through creating an actual Bootstrap project and kind of getting it set up. Number three, we'll talk about the grid, which is the foundational component of user interfaces in Bootstrap. Then we'll talk about doing text in Bootstrap, images, panels, forms, buttons, text inputs, drop-down inputs, lists, and navigation. There's a lot more than this to Bootstrap. It really is a fully comprehensive framework, but this will provide a good introduction. With what I'm going to go through, you can actually build a pretty decent user interface, and without knowing, how to really even code JavaScript or having to do any sort of real design, you can get a pretty good looking user interface with this. So again, here's the introduction. So Bootstrap is an HTML5 user interface framework. It's open source, works well on all kinds of different devices and sizes of devices. It works well on pretty much any browser that any user would be using these days in the modern era, which would be Chrome, Edge, Internet Explorer, the latest version of that, the latest version really of all of these, a modern version at least. Also Safari from Apple, and then Opera, the open source browser. So Bootstrap is what's called responsive in that it adjusts automatically. I gave the example earlier. If a user is browsing a Bootstrap website, a Bootstrap coded website on a mobile phone, and they rotate their phone so that it goes from portrait mode to landscape mode, Bootstrap will recognize that and use JavaScript to basically change the orientation of the website to make it adapt to the landscape mode. So that's that adaptation on the fly is called responsive, and it works the same if the user even just adjusts the size of the web app. So I'm going to give you an example here. So this is the Great Louisiana Fishing Trail web application that my team and I built for the CIS 4600 final project here at Northwestern. And you can see that it's a pretty standard PC web application. And it's I'm running it in Internet Explorer. So you know, what happens to a normal web page whenever you would start to make it smaller is that, you know, you start to get scroll bars. And you will get some scroll bars with Bootstrap as well, but what you'll see what happens is instead of just, you know, only doing scroll bars, it also tries to adapt the web app user interface to the size of the browser. So notice the first thing it did there was shrink the images, right? So it's trying to, you know, make the images smaller to fit on the page, and it's narrowing some margins as well. And I'm not doing any of that, right? So as I keep going, you'll see that it realized that, you know, if it shrinks the images anymore, the margins anymore, they're going to start to run into each other. So what it did was it took this horizontal table with these 3 columns and it turned it into a vertical table. So the 3 columns now are going top to bottom. So Bootstrap did all of that on its own. When we coded this website, I just built the table using Bootstrap grid, which we'll go through in one of the lessons, and it knew how to do this. The other thing you can see up top is that the menu, as I got smaller, it was this format. So there's this left part of the menu and then the right part of the menu. It also adjusted that, right? So it knew that it was going to start mixing these things together, and so it dropped the right side of the menu down on another page. You've also seen on mobile apps, I'm sure, where the interface the menu is represented by these little lines. So, you know, Bootstrap sort of started that. This icon actually came from Bootstrap. And so as the web application gets too small, or the window size gets too small to even show the menu, it'll collapse that menu into this. And again, none of that was coded by the development team. That is the Bootstrap framework. If you use Bootstrap navigation, it will automatically adjust to this sort of menu on a smaller device. So that's just a quick example of some things that Bootstrap can do for you. And what I mean by responsive. So as I mentioned earlier, Bootstrap is templatable. I know that's not a word, but you get the gist there. In that developers can make money by creating and selling their templates as kits to other developers to get started, right? So let's say that you know, you're a web development company and you've got a law firm that came to you to get a website. Well, you know, you could start that from scratch, but you could probably also go find a template for a law firm website that was built in Bootstrap that, you know, maybe you could pay $50 for and use that template to get started, which would probably save you a lot more than $50 of coding to get, you know, the initial website set up that said something maybe like, you know, homepage, the services we offer, a list of lawyers, a contact page. You know, likely that template's already got that stuff in there and you wouldn't have to build it from scratch. You could just use what's in the template. So finally, a set of resources. So the main site for Bootstrap is getbootstrap.com. And if you just go there, it'll take you to a getting started page. The licensing facts, so as I mentioned earlier, it is open source. There are, I believe it uses the Apache open source licensing, which, you know, provides some basic boundaries, but for all intents and purposes, it's free to use. So, but to get more detail about that, you can go here. And then this is the project on GitHub. So since it is open source, you know, as a developer, you can download the source code and change whatever you want and do whatever you want to with it. So this is the project on GitHub with the source code. So a short quiz. How is Bootstrap different from plain HTML? how much does Bootstrap cost? And then on which device types will Bootstrap work well? And then where was Bootstrap created? So the answers are on the next slide. As you're going through this session, you can get those answers there. So to follow up on the quiz here, so how is Bootstrap different from plain HTML? Well, Bootstrap simplifies HTML into ready-to-use classes and scripts. How much does Bootstrap cost? It is free and open source. On which device types will it work well? Pretty much on any device type, on any modern browser. And then where was Bootstrap created? So Bootstrap was created by software engineers at Twitter in about 2011, I believe. So here are the quiz answers. And I hope that you got a pretty good intro to the Bootstrap framework, and move on to session 2 for how to set up a Bootstrap project.